Happy Halloween, everybody, but more importantly, happy College Football Playoff Rankings Day. That is what we're really celebrating tonight. Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. We're so glad you could be here for our Tuesday night live stream, annual Tuesday live stream, at a new time tonight because while we typically are on the air at 7, we are on the air at 6, a little before 6 tonight, because like we mentioned, we will have the first set of College Football Playoff Rankings here live with you, our live reaction, our live analysis on what's going to happen here in less than probably 10 minutes, because they'll have to do their intro, they'll have to do all the fancy pleasantries, and then we'll get into the real stuff. So we will be here breaking that down. We will have our guy College Football Encyclopedia on with us shortly after that. He will share his analysis on what we will see again here in about 15 minutes or so. And it's a big night. It's a really big night. This is what kind of lays the groundwork for the final month of the season. I think a lot of people tend to, blow these rankings, the first set off as no big deal. But this is what kind of shows what goes through the minds of the committee. Will they value resume? Will they value the eye test? Will they value margin of victory? What is going to, go through the mind of the committee, not just tonight, but as we get closer and closer to Selection Sunday, which with the way things are going this year and with the possibility of what could happen these next few weeks could be actually more hectic than we're expecting. The SEC still wide open. Georgia obviously the favorite, but if Alabama were to beat LSU, that would create some chaos possibly in the SEC championship if Alabama were to win that. The Big 12 wide open. The Pac-12 wide open. The ACC is Florida State's to lose. The second best team is Louisville. How highly ranked would the Cardinals be? And if they were to win out and be 11-1, could they slip into the playoff? There's a lot at stake tonight. And we're really excited to get the answers. Although we're not the biggest fans of the committee. We're not the biggest fans of how they operate. We're not the biggest fans of their, what's the word I'm looking for? Criteria, I guess, because it varies from year to year depending on who's on the committee. We are very excited to see what goes down and whether we agree or disagree with the initial set of rankings. My gut says we will disagree with quite a bit of it. We'll give a couple shout outs before we get started, and then we'll kind of break down a couple other key storylines as we are set to watch. Now, remember, we cannot watch them. We can't air them live on YouTube, unfortunately. We can maybe have a little audio, but we'll not be able to air them live on YouTube. Otherwise, we'll get banned. That's how it works. The copyright deal. ESPN will, crucify us if we do that. So watch along on your phones, watch along on your TV, whatever it be. We'll be announcing them live as we go, and then we'll break everything down from there. College football guy, good to see you. Lakers dude 7, good to see you popping in here. Mr. Glassman, Glassman 81, nice to have you. I know you said you predict Ohio State to be number 1. We'll touch on that here soon. Eddie Rose, nice to see you. We're curious to see where the Tigers are ranked heading into their big matchup against Georgia. Robert, curious to see where your Bulldogs are ranked. College football guys, I mentioned, good to see you. Mitch, my man, Mitch Thayer, nice to have you here. Everybody else that is watching us live or maybe joining us later on for this playoff analysis show. Now, you take a look what we're looking at here. Here's our top 4 as of now. If you watched our GE Top 25 videos, you know the reasoning for a lot of these, but our most recent poll that we put out yesterday afternoon, our top 4 is Michigan, Georgia, Florida State, and Ohio State. That is my top 4 entering tonight. Now, I know a lot of people may disagree with that. That's okay. That's what we're here to debate. That's what we're here to discuss. I will say that I believe that the playoff committee will probably have Ohio State at number 1. I think that is they have a very valid case to be ranked number 1. The Buckeyes arguably have the best resume in the country. They arguably have the best resume with wins over Notre Dame and Penn State, both of which are expected to be ranked inside the top 15. But if you're looking for a team that has been the most dominant and, to me, the best, truly the best team in the country, it is Michigan. I know the Wolverines have not maybe had as tough of a schedule. That's coming. They have to go to Penn State. They still have to play Ohio State. They cannot help the lackluster schedule in conference play. Non-conference, sure, they could have scheduled better. Ohio State didn't schedule any better outside of one game against Notre Dame. We'll give them that. So a lot at stake here tonight. Again, that is our top 4. We believe Ohio State will be number 1. Who will follow them, though? Will they honor head-to-head? That's another factor that typically is at play a lot of the times with these playoff rankings is the committee tries to honor the head-to-head results if the two teams have the same record or very similar in there. Obviously, a team that's 2-5, they were to upset the number one team of the country and not going to be ahead of anybody, right? But Washington should be ahead of Oregon, but how closely will Oregon be? Could you see Washington and Oregon both get inside the top 4? Because here's the thing. I believe right now, Oregon's better than Washington. I know the Huskies beat them a couple weeks ago, but if they were to play together right now, right after this playoff show, I believe Oregon would win that game. And if those two teams do meet on a neutral site in the Pac-12 championship game, I would be picking Oregon over Washington. So where will the Ducks fall? Where will Ohio State fall? Where will the reigning national champions twice, two-time national champion Georgia fall? Will they be number 2? Will it be 1 solely based on the fact that they are the reigning champions? The AP poll, Georgia has not fallen off at all. The AP poll, Georgia has remained the number 1 team in the country. Will the committee honor that? They've won, 25 straight games. They've won back-to-back national titles. They really haven't shown anything as to why they shouldn't be ranked number 1, even though they've had some relatively lackluster performances against Auburn, not the best showing against Vanderbilt, but did show out against a semi-decent Florida team. So again, we are curious to see what the committee releases here in a matter of minutes. Watching it live with you, getting our live reactions shortly after. We'll have College Football Encyclopedia on with us to give us his take, and then we'll kind of usher into a Week 9 recap and a Week 10 preview, which is going to feature a lot of big games. And that's the last thing we'll say here before we await these rankings. What we see tonight is going to change drastically, right? It's going to change significantly over the next few weeks. This week alone, we're going to see it change drastically. We're going to see it change drastically because what we're looking at here is a week where we see Alabama and LSU play each other, Georgia and Missouri play each other, Washington and USC play each other, Texas and Kansas State play each other. Not as big of a game for Kansas State when it comes to playoff hopes, but it certainly is for Texas. We just saw Oklahoma lose their first game to Kansas. Where will the Sooners fall? Will they remain in the top 10? Will they be ranked ahead of Texas? Same record, but more recent loss and not as good of a loss as Texas has. Texas, Oklahoma to Kansas. So a lot of questions here, guys, that we're not entirely sure how it's exactly going to pan out. Again, Mitch, good to see you. College Football Guy, good to see you. Doggy, good to see you. Mr. Glassman, as always, excited to see you here as well. Luis Ramos, good to see you. Florida State should be at 3. That's where we have them. We have Florida State at 3. College Football Guy says Ohio State 1, Florida State 2, Michigan 3, and Georgia 4. Matthew Hazelhorse, good to see you, my guy. Nice to have you here. Looking forward to getting your take on our Kansas State prediction video coming out on Friday. College Football Guy, we'll address that later on. Yeah, I did see the Dabo, the Dabo question, or the Dabo rant on the 12-year-old. I guess it was a 12-year-old. That was not pretty, to say the least. Not pretty at all. But we have to understand that heading into tonight, the committee is bound to make a lot of mistakes. The problem is with the committee, and this is something that we have struggled to see, what we've struggled to see over the last couple of years is the committee will release a set of rankings like this. They might release one next week as well. But the consistency is what we need. If they're going to rank a team ahead of whatever because of head-to-head or because of margin of victory, if they want to value that or whatever, then you have to stay consistent with that. You have to remain that be the case going down the road. You can't base it off of one thing one week and base it off another next week. And we've seen the committee do that. They've been wildly inconsistent over the course of their time. Keep in mind, we're coming up on 10 years of this thing. College football playoff began in 2014. We're in the year 2023. It's really kind of hard to believe that we've had this 14 playoff going for so long. And quite frankly, it hasn't been as good or as consistent as I think it should have been or needs to be. Next year is going to take a wild difference. We've got our first set of rankings. Here we go. Looking at it right now, like what I see. Although surprised to see Air Force down at 25. Obviously, that's going to be due to their strength of schedule. The Falcons coming in that low. Tulane and Air Force, what you need to watch out for. Those two teams are going to be in the hunt for a New Year's Six bowl berth. They are honoring the head-to-head to an extent. Oklahoma State getting the head over Kansas, but the Cowboys beat Kansas, and yet the Jayhawks are ranked ahead of them, most likely due to the fact that they just got that win over Oklahoma. So I guess I'll give them that. the quality of win for Kansas, also not having a loss to South Alabama, benefits the Jayhawks, giving them that edge over Oklahoma State. Air Force, though, surprisingly low at 25. USC remaining ranked at 20 is intriguing to me. That's wildly intriguing to see the Trojans still ranked after a horrible performance against Cal, a blowout loss to Notre Dame, and another loss to Utah, who they do have ranked 18th. Tennessee at 17 sounds about right. We've got them at what, like 24th? So maybe a little high there for Tennessee. Oregon State up at 16, though. I think that's about right for the Beavers. I wouldn't have expected them to drop outside the top 20, even though they did lose to Arizona. Definitely a little perplexed by this. 3 straight Pac-12 teams, 4 in that next section of 5. But Utah obviously owning the head-to-head over USC plays a big role. I'm still perplexed by the group of 5. We'll touch more on that here shortly to see Air Force and Tulane both so low right next to each other, with Tulane getting the slight edge over the Falcons when it comes to the New Year's Six Bowl race. Into the top 15 now. Notre Dame low at 15. Really expect the Fighting Irish to be ranked a little bit higher. 15 seems a little bit low to me. Louisville at 13th. Now, that's an intriguing mark. Louisville at 13th, meaning if the Cardinals can win out up into the ACC championship game, that could make an intriguing case when they take on Florida State, possibly, if they can win out and be 11-1. So watch out for the Cardinals. Missouri at 12, entering their big showdown against Georgia. Little high for me for Missouri. Probably would have had them around where Notre Dame is. They actually probably swapped them. I know Missouri only has 1 loss, but shocked to see them there, and especially shocked to see them ahead of LSU still to an extent, considering they did lose the Tigers, although LSU I know has 2 losses. And Penn State outside the top 10 is very interesting. Seeing the Nittany Lions at 11th, I think they're clearly looking at that based on their really poor performance against Indiana, which kind of put them out of the top 10. Look, Ole Miss in the top 10 is not good, man. That is not a good spot at all. Ole Miss is not a top 10 team. That's very interesting to me. They're borderline 11, 12, somewhere around there, but 10th, no. We'll touch on that. Ole Miss, way too high here. Very horrible schedule on their end, and yet they're still 10th. Oklahoma at 9. So Texas will be ahead of Oklahoma despite losing the head-to-head, and that's going to be largely in part due to Oklahoma's loss to Kansas. I wouldn't be surprised to see Texas in right at 8. 7th or 8th for Texas. Going to be 7th. Has to be 7th. They're definitely not top 6. Alabama in at 8. That's another storyline to watch here. The Crimson Tide, I feel like, have been left for dead. People think they've been left for dead. And yet, if they beat LSU, they're probably going to win the SEC West. That's interesting to see Alabama at 8, Oklahoma at 9. I imagine Texas will be at 7. They own the head-to-head over the Crimson Tide. So imagine they would be put there. If they're higher than that, I would be very shocked. They're not. It's the 7th. Which means the top 6 is going to be what we thought. You're going to have Ohio State, Georgia, Michigan, Florida State, Washington, and Oregon. Some combination of those teams making up your top 6. And again, you can see the committee for the most part is valuing head-to-head. They're valuing the head-to-head results here for the most part. I still would love to know the logic between with Notre Dame being as low as they are and Ole Miss being in the top 10. Why is Ole Miss that high? We have to understand, guys, there is a good possibility. Actually, I take that back. Maybe they're doing this for Georgia, right? If y'all forget, Georgia plays Ole Miss next weekend. Not this Saturday, but next weekend. So Ole Miss has got A&M on deck this Saturday. And then if they beat them, they'll be 8-1, remaining in the top 10, which would give Georgia that extra top 10 win or top 10 game, which they really have lacked all year long. Georgia's schedule has been so lax. They're going to play number 12 Missouri. Then they're going to get a top 10 game against Ole Miss. And then they're going to have more than likely a top 15 team and Tennessee, 3 consecutive games for their wrap up against Georgia Tech and then play in the SEC championship, assuming they can get past those 3 teams that we just mentioned. So definitely a couple things that we disagree with tonight. We'll be anxious to get y'all's thoughts in the comments here shortly. I am definitely perplexed by a handful of decisions here. You can't tell me that you value strength of schedule when there are a handful of teams with very weak strength of schedules drastically higher than others. I know Ole Miss. I'm still very confused with them in the top 10. I know Ole Miss has beaten Tulane by double digits. I know their only loss was to Alabama. Where's the other good win for Ole Miss? I mean, what am I missing something? Vanderbilt, Auburn, Arkansas. They really haven't beaten anybody of quality as of yet. And the one big game they had, they lost by 14 on the road. I agree with Mitch there. How is USC above Kansas State? Beats me. Kansas State is playing phenomenal football. So what this tells me is that the committee, it doesn't feel like the committee really cares about the eye test. So this feels like a committee that's going to heavily regard resume, which still some of these teams don't have very good resumes, because Kansas State's playing as good of football as anybody in the country right now. They've won their last 2 games by a combined score of 82-3. They have shut out their opponents for 9 straight quarters. Kansas State hasn't allowed a touchdown. They haven't allowed a touchdown in over 142 minutes of game time, and yet they are ranked significantly below that of USC, who, again, has been absolutely terrible as of late. Entering the top 6 now, we got Oregon at 6. I imagine Washington's going to be at 5, 4 or 5 for Washington, but Oregon right on the outside looking in as that 16. And that's not a surprise. That's not a surprise. I don't think anybody really expected Oregon to be in it. They have a loss. I know it was to Washington. It was a narrow one. I know many believe Oregon would win a rematch if it happened right now. But a loss is a loss is a loss. It's on the record, and you can't rank Washington below them. Washington does get the 5th spot. So just to throw it back up there, this was our projected top 4. Do I think that's what it's going to be? No, I don't. But this is where it's going to get very interesting here. Washington above Oregon's fine. Clearly not valuing that win over Oregon enough to put them in over a team like maybe Georgia, who really doesn't have a quality win on their resume. Keep in mind that Georgia is going to be in the top 4 despite no quality wins, although the schedule, as we mentioned, is coming up with those 3 ranked opponents. Florida State at 4. Interesting. A team that annihilated LSU, who they have ranked in their top 15? Annihilated them, did beat Clemson on the road. I know Clemson's not good this year, but did beat Clemson. And Florida State at undefeated, having scored over 30 points in almost if not all games this year, finds themselves at 4th behind who? I really could see this being Georgia or Michigan being at 3. Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State are left. And if it's Ohio State, and they clearly don't value resume as much as we thought, which is very, very intriguing. Florida State at 4, Michigan at 3, so clearly they do. Michigan was our top team in the country, guys. We believe Michigan is the best team in the country, but they are, obviously trying to okay. And then Georgia, so Ohio State is number 1 as we predicted. Okay, there you go. So Ohio State at number 1, Georgia at 2, Michigan at 3, Florida State at 4. So there you have it. Ohio State number 1 in the first college football playoff poll, followed by Georgia, Michigan, and Florida State. Washington, Oregon on the outside looking in. Okay, here we go. A lot to unpack here. And for those of you that are here, thank you guys for joining us here at the Gridiron Expert. We'll be doing this every single Tuesday night for all of the playoff ranking shows. So make sure to subscribe, to like the stream especially, but subscribe. We'd love to continue to grow our GE Nation. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and help us grow, and make sure to be back here every Tuesday night for these live reactions that will later turn into call-in shows. Tonight, we will not have call-ins due to bringing in College Football Encyclopedia, so we'll be bringing him in shortly for his analysis and his initial takes. But do subscribe. Do check out everything down in the description. Check out those expert picks over on the gridironexpert.com. We need 7 more subscriptions to the expert picks, and we'll have reached our goal for the year. 55-26 run against the spread. Wanted to cram all that in there where we had a lot of people on the stream. So again, we appreciate all of you for being here. Let's get into the rankings. I've got to pull it up on Twitter as well. All right, we'll start at the bottom. Now we're here. All right. You look at Air Force and Tulane. The one thing you need to look at here from the committee standpoint is we do not have as deep of a race for the New Year's 6 bowl spot in the rankings this year. There are not that many group of 5 teams in the hunt. Tulane and Air Force have been those top teams all season long and probably will remain those top teams, which means the margin of error for both is very, very slim. I mean, to have Tulane at 24, Air Force at 25, I mean, there's not that large of a gap there. What I will be interested to see, and what this does tell me, is that if both teams win out and win their respective conferences, a one-loss Tulane will get the New Year's Six bowl spot over an undefeated Air Force. Because how can you change that? If you were the committee and you're already ranking Tulane there, how can you jump Air Force over Tulane unless the Green Wave lose? That's something that stands out to me. And both have relatively favorable schedules going down the stretch. Tulane obviously playing in a relatively tougher conference than that of the Mountain West, but Tulane the front runner to get this a New Year's Six bowl berth for the second year in a row. A lot of football left to be played, but something to watch out for there. Kansas, Oklahoma State, and Kansas State, 3 consecutive teams in a row from the Big 12. Cannot stress enough how big of a weekend this will be in the Big 12. You've got Kansas and Iowa State. That's huge when it comes to the standings. You've got Texas and Kansas State. That's huge for the standings. Oklahoma State and Oklahoma, huge for the standings, huge for the playoff. A lot of big games in the Big 12 that's going to help decide not just who wins that conference, but also determine who maybe makes the playoff from that conference, if any teams do at all. Kansas getting the edge over Oklahoma State despite losing to the Cowboys. I think they're weighing that Oklahoma win quite a bit, right? That they're weighing that Oklahoma win heavily and thought that was enough to give them the leap. Even though they lost a head-to-head, give them that leap, considering the Cowboys do have a 26-point home loss to South Alabama. They deserve to be ranked. I will not deny that. But I'm not that upset with Kansas being ranked ahead of them, and I'm not ranked ahead of Oklahoma State being ahead of Kansas State because they did win that head-to-head as well. USC, though, being 20th is a little high. Who has USC beat? Seriously, who has USC beat? Tell me. Am I blanking? The two biggest games on USC's schedule, and they've lost. They got destroyed by Notre Dame and then lost at home to a Utah team that got steamrolled against Oregon in Salt Lake City. And then that same USC team narrowly beat California 50-49. USC shouldn't even be ranked. Who are we joking here? Just because you've got Caleb Williams as your quarterback doesn't mean that you deserve to be ranked. Just because you got one good player on your team and you've got a kindergarten for a defense doesn't mean you should be ranked. We do not have USC ranked in our top 25. I do not believe they should be ranked in the playoff poll. And if they were, like Scotty said, should be down 23, 24, 25. Being 20th, ahead of someone like Kansas State, even ahead of someone like Air Force, dare I say, Air Force would run all over USC. That is a bit of a shock. And to be ranked ahead of Kansas even, who has a top 10 victory on their resume while USC has nobody. Again, the two biggest games. Does USC have time to do that? Sure. They got Washington this weekend. So you beat Washington, maybe all's forgiven. But that's an interesting thing. And that really benefits Washington in this case to say, hey, if we beat USC on the road, that's another top 20 victory on our resume to go along with the win over Oregon. So that's really interesting to me. UCLA ahead of them, Utah at 18. No big issues throughout there. I think Notre Dame's a little bit low. 2 losses for the Fighting Irish, and their 2 losses have come to who? Ohio State, who's now the number 1 team in the country, and Louisville, who they just had a really bad game against. I do think Louisville should be ranked ahead of them. Bump Ohio State up a few spots, maybe. I probably would have Louisville's. Honestly, I can't say much, right? I've got Louisville at 15. I've got Missouri at 14. I've got LSU at 13. So a lot of those kind of in the ballpark of our GE top 25. Not a huge drastic difference there, but I do think Notre Dame, who I have at 11th, should be even ahead of some of those teams there. Should be ahead. We've got Notre Dame ahead of Ole Miss, LSU, Missouri, and Louisville slightly. Just with how well that the Fighting Irish are playing, and obviously how bad Louisville's loss was to Pittsburgh. Clearly, the committee choosing to ignore that to an extent, kind of brushing it off as a fluke, in which case they should do that for some other teams as well. Penn State outside the top 10 is fine, although I would swap them. Give Penn State Ole Miss's spot, man. Ole Miss, to me, is not a top 10 team right now. They're not. They have not had the resume. They have not had the opportunities. The biggest chance they had to make a statement was Alabama, and they failed. So I don't like Ole Miss being at number 10. Oklahoma at 9 is fine. We've got them at 10th. Then you've got the rest. Again, we don't have Ohio State as number one in our poll. But I cannot necessarily be that upset with Ohio State being number one. I really can't. I get why. But once again, like we said before the rankings even were released, we said the committee has to be consistent. So what this is telling me is, for the most part, they are valuing resume. They should. It matters who you beat. But they are valuing the fact that Ohio State did beat two teams that they have ranked in their top 15? Both Notre Dame and Penn State, which is better than anybody else in the country. So they're valuing that versus Georgia and Michigan, both of which have played nobodies, but are about to. And that's something that we, again, need to keep in mind, right? Georgia, Michigan, Florida State not really, but Georgia and Michigan at least are about to start playing some tough teams. I mean, Georgia's got Missouri. It's a top 12 matchup. Then they've got Ole Miss, who apparently is a top 10 team. And then you've got Tennessee. And if Tennessee keeps winning, that'll be a top 15 showdown. So they are stacking it up for Georgia to start getting some resume-boosting victories. On their schedule. And the same can be said for Michigan, who is going to play Penn State in Happy Valley here in a few weeks, and then obviously is going to play Ohio State in the game in the season finale. And that's huge. Very well could be the number one, number two teams in the country when those two teams face off. So the rankings are subject to change. Obviously, they're going to change drastically. It's going to start to work itself out. Will the committee be consistent in their reasonings for that? Will they continue to show reason and logic and consistency with how they rank these teams? Again, I really am interested to see. And Luis, thank you, my guy. I want to pull that up real quick. Thank you so much for that super chat. Goes a long way. Again, for all of you here, we appreciate you being here at the Gridiron Expert. Like, comment, subscribe. We're doing this every Tuesday night for every playoff ranking show. You do not want to miss it. We're going to have a lot of analysis, a lot of in-depth discussion on what the committee puts out. Good, bad, ugly, all of it. We're here every Tuesday. Don't miss out. Subscribe. Check out the expert picks as well. 56 to, 22, 27 run, something like that. Yeah, 56 to 27 run against the spread is what we're on right now. We're killing it. We're absolutely killing it. So go subscribe to those expert picks. We're 7 away from doing that 24-hour live stream. And why not? Guaranteed winnings. You don't want to miss out. But we appreciate all of you. Thank you for being here. Luis says, I would actually love for the rankings to stay like this. Give me Ohio State to reach the championship game. You believe your Florida State Seminoles can beat them. And that's the funny thing too, right? Isn't it the funny thing? We've got Ohio State ranked 1. They've got the best, according to the committee, wins in the country, the best resume in the country. And yet a lot of us view Ohio State as vulnerable. They certainly were vulnerable on Saturday night. They did not look good against Wisconsin. We're a turnover machine against Wisconsin. And against any other team that had a mediocre offense, because Wisconsin is certainly well below average, probably would have lost that game on the road. You know, if Ohio State had done that on the road at Penn State, they lose to Penn State. If Ohio State had done that on the road to Michigan, they lose to Michigan. They do on the road to Florida State. Again, Wisconsin playing with a backup quarterback. I'm not saying Tanner Mordecai would have been the guy to lead them, but the amount of turnovers that Ohio State had that Wisconsin was unable to take advantage of, and then Ohio State only won by 14, they are vulnerable. We give them credit for that win over Notre Dame. They got that win. They won at the last second. They won with no time left. Win to win was that close to being a loss, and we've got a new, different number one team in the country right now. They're getting by. They got by that game by the skin of their teeth. They got by Ohio State, but being fortunate, or by Wisconsin being fortunate to play a weak opponent. They got by Penn State on the strength of their defense. Keep in mind, they didn't pull away from that game until like mid fourth quarter. There's a window there if you're against Ohio State being number one. If you want to beat Ohio State, if you want to dethrone Ohio State, there's a window there. And for what it's worth, I do believe Michigan will beat Ohio State in the season finale, unless something drastically changes in my mind or some drastic injury happens to one of these teams. I like Michigan significantly over Ohio State. Science stealing be damned. I feel confident in that. But Luis, thank you very much for that super chat. We appreciate that. We appreciate all of you that are here tonight on our GE live stream. Again, continue to like, to comment, subscribe, share the video. Be here every single Tuesday. Sign up for those expert picks. Again, 7 away from our reaching our goal and bringing a 24-hour live stream right here to the channel. We'll be doing that on a Friday night into Saturday so we can watch football with you all day long. We'd love for your support, love for the exposure, love to gain the subscribers and continue to grow our GE Nation. So we do appreciate that. Ohio State, again, the #1 team in the country based on the College Football Playoff Committee. Let's go ahead and bring in, shoot a text over to Connor. We're going to bring our guy, College Football Encyclopedia, in to get his take on the rankings tonight, his immediate analysis. He and I talked before the show. He agrees with me. We've got Michigan as our #1 team in the country. We do believe Michigan's the #1 team in the country. Should be the #1 team in the country. But, again, we can understand why. Going to answer a couple questions in the comments here. Ryan Dobis says, thank God it's the only poll. Again, it's not good. It's not good. The playoff poll is not good. I've seen worse. I have certainly seen worse, but it's not good. Matthew Hazelhorse, good to see you. Committee had to get Ole Miss a top 10 ranking because their schedule is stupid weak. And if they manage to beat Georgia, then there you go. Shoe in annuals, easy schedule, healthy SEC team. And to an extent, you've got a point. But also, guys, what we have to understand here too, Matthew, and it's a valid point. What we also have to understand is not only do these rankings affect the teams maybe contending for a playoff spot themselves. If Ole Miss were to win out, they'd get in there, sure. It helps other teams' resume. Let's think about this for a second. Ole Miss is a top 10 team, which technically means Alabama's got a top 10 win on their resume. Technically, that's how it works. If you're an Ole Miss fan this weekend, you are rooting hard for LSU to beat Alabama in Death Valley, because if that happens, that creates a three-way tie for first in the SEC West, which will create chaos in that conference. LSU lost to Ole Miss, who lost to Alabama. The final 3 weeks of the season would be insane, and that would provide a top 10 matchup between Ole Miss and Georgia, like Matthew said. Very well could be the first of two meetings between those programs and would have an opportunity to guarantee the SEC getting a team into the playoff, because more than likely you would still have Georgia versus Ole Miss in the SEC championship game, both with one loss, winners in, losers out. There's a lot at stake. So not only do these rankings affect the teams that are trying to continue to move up, they affect the teams that are already ranked because they can add these teams to their resume. Say the committee views Ole Miss as top 10. The committee views Notre Dame as top 25. The committee views USC as 20. Therefore, that counts as a resume boosting win to my schedule, even though in reality maybe they aren't nearly as good. So definitely there's so many stages in these rankings. And again, that's why we talk about how big of a deal these are, how important these are. So yeah, a lot of stuff going on here. Let's go ahead and bring on our, I guess we can call him our playoff correspondent, or our encyclopedia, college football encyclopedia, going to join the show right now and give us his take on the rankings. So Connor, college football encyclopedia, how you doing, man?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. No, we're thrilled to have you. And let's just jump into it. We just saw the committee release their first set of rankings. And what were your initial takeaways?
I wasn't surprised by anything that I saw. I figured that Liberty and James Madison would not be ranked. For one, their strength of schedules aren't that great, especially Liberty. In fact, I believe Liberty was a team that even you and I discussed a couple months ago that we thought could have a really good record this year because of their schedule and the conference they play in with Conference USA this year. James Madison is not going to be ranked for two reasons. One, their strength of schedule. I don't have the numbers on me right now. I don't remember off the top of my head what their strength of schedule rating is, but it's not that tough if I remember correctly. And then another thing to keep in mind is JMU is not even eligible for the postseason this year. That includes conference championship and the Sun Belt, and then of course bowl games. So that's another thing to keep in mind when the committee is, I'm not sure if they've used this word yet tonight, but splitting hairs between teams. They're going to factor that in, which is why they're not going to have JMU, at least in their initial college football playoff rankings. Let's keep something else in mind here for those of you that were probably or hoping to see some G5 teams higher in the rankings. The College Football Playoff Committee is not going to consider the G5 for a playoff spot until the playoff expands. That's just the reality. They're not going to give the G5 the same degree of respect, obviously, that the Power 5 will receive. And so and something else to keep in mind, and Alex, we talked about this a couple years ago with Cincinnati. They were in a different situation that year. That was a one-time thing for a G5 team to make the 4-team format. But you have to keep in mind for these teams that are right now like 7, 8, 9, 10 in that range, what about the teams that they end up beating down the stretch who are maybe or maybe not the top 25 right now? Does the committee put those Power 5 teams in to give those teams better resumes to boost their resumes rather than, say, rank a JMU 24 or 25? That's another thing to keep in mind. And that is what's going to happen, because ultimately it's for money purposes and TV deals. Let's just say the facts, which is a Power 5 team, we can name them off the top of our head, is going to receive more views than a Cincinnati in the past, although they made it, or like a JMU or an Air Force right now. So the selections of certain teams being ranked where they are, like a USC being ranked right now, KU, Kansas State doesn't surprise me. The spot, like the exact placement of some of where the teams are, does not surprise me either. I guess the one thing I was a little bit surprised by is Ohio State at number 1 rather than Georgia or Michigan at number 1. But then strength of schedule comes into play, and that's where the difference is. Ohio State and Texas probably have 2 of the best wins in the country right now, with Ohio State at Notre Dame, and then with Texas in Tuscaloosa, of course, back in week 2. But honestly, like for those that are like arguing, oh, but Georgia needs to be 1 or Michigan needs to be number 1, Ohio State 3 or 4, it's going to be decided in a month. Like I'm not here to complain about the exact placement. Like, oh, this team's overrated, they need to be 2 spots lower, and then vice versa. Like I don't care right now. It's going to be decided anyways. Now, would I be I would be more willing to make the argument for, let's say, in 3 weeks from now, if I think a team should be like 12 or 13 and instead they're like 19 or 20. Of course, that likely won't matter in terms of the playoff race either. So unless a team I think is in the playoff, like in the top 4, that just does not deserve to be, then I'm not really going to argue and have much to say, because there's not really much to argue for here, unless you just think because a team is undefeated, they deserve to be ranked.
Yeah, and a lot of great points there. And I like what you said about it all kind of falling into place down the road. We got to remember, guys, last year, Tennessee was the initial number 1 team in the rankings, set up that monster top 3 showdown in Athens against Georgia. Georgia took that spot right back. So Tennessee had an impressive resume at the time. They had that win over Alabama. It was great. Right. And again, it worked itself out. And that's kind of what we're looking at here. Ohio State still has to play Michigan. Michigan still has to play Penn State and Ohio State, so the toughest games ahead for them. Georgia still has, as we mentioned, a very difficult 3-game stretch coming up with Missouri, Ole Miss, and then Tennessee in 3 consecutive games in the SEC championship against whoever that may be. It could be Bama, LSU, or Ole Miss. Any of those teams are still in the hunt as of right now. But I also liked what you said there at the end, too, with the fact that you've got an interesting group of 5 race going on right now. You've got Air Force, you've got Tulane. Those are the only contenders here. I mean, Liberty's not a factor. James Madison, as you mentioned, is a factor. While both are undefeated, playing great ball, they're not in contention for that. So it's down to those 2. And you can't help but wonder, while, yes, the strength of schedule isn't as good for Liberty in the Conference USA, isn't that great for James Madison, could the committee continue to slight them? Because in their eyes, it's what's it matter if they're ranked or not? Why don't we get another FBS team ranked in there that's going to benefit a top 10 team in the country, benefit a true playoff contender, so it can say, hey, look, they've got this top 25 win on their schedule, or look, now they're playing a top 25 team this week. Because again, it doesn't matter if Liberty's ranked, it doesn't matter if James Madison's ranked, they will not play a role in anything. Right. Whereas throwing just a mediocre, and I'm just trying to think of, I can't even think of a great example. If Texas A&M wins this weekend, throwing A&M in there at 24, 25 next week, they're not in contention for anything, but that helps Alabama look better. That helps, all these other top teams ahead of them, the SEC, look better down the road. Yep. And that's something to kind of keep in mind.
Yes. And that kind of answers to the theme that people have argued about since 2014 with the situation, especially with like Baylor and TCU. And then, of course, we've had some other discussions with teams who we thought should have been ranked and that were not by the end of the season or end of the regular season, I mean. But the argument that people have said is that the College Football Playoff Committee has their own agenda, and they do. And this is the agenda that we are discussing right now. Now, which is the committee wants a certain category of team. They want a certain label for the team to make the playoff. They don't want the G5 in there, and they're going to do everything in their power to not put them in there. Now, this year, I don't really think there's an argument for a G5 team. But throw out Cincinnati 2 years ago, and I discussed with you 2 years ago that situation was different coming into the season. But you were going to see this every single year. Well, of course, I guess this is the last year of the 4-team format. But you have to keep in mind the teams that are like 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, they're going to the committee is going to try to boost their resumes by putting the teams on their schedules, if their record is good enough, to be ranked rather than an 8-0 or 11-1 Liberty. That's just the reality. And a lot of us are going to have to face that. Now, once the 12-team format starts, whenever it does, I mean, I think it's set for next year, but when that starts, it'll get a little bit more interesting because you will probably have at least one G5 team in there. And then, of course, there's going to be some other teams that have the path set up, but they don't have the strength of schedule, but their record is really interesting, and they're kind of floating in that 13 to 17 range in the rankings. It'll get more interesting then, and we'll have some total new discussions then. But for now, this is the way it is. The top 6 teams right now, I think, have separated themselves a little bit, but the Pac-12 is going to be crazy because Oregon State could win their next 2 games. They get Washington at home. If Oregon State beats Washington, that's going to create some chaos. And by the way, that could easily happen. Oregon State is a much better home team than they are a road team.
Significantly,
yeah. And Oregon State's probably going to win their next 2 games. If that just happens, like just taking like one small path, one small example there, that's going to change the total landscape, because then Oregon State's going to go into Eugene with potential, whoever wins plays the Pac-12 championship against Washington. Or what about if USC beats Washington this weekend? And so there's just a lot of things that can happen, especially in the Pac-12. I mean, there's a couple of things that could happen in the Big Ten, but not a lot of variance there. It's just really a couple teams. The SEC.
I think the Big Ten, well, touching on both those, I think starting with the Big Ten, chaos ensues there if Penn State beats Michigan in Happy Valley.
Yes.
And then Michigan beats Ohio State. If you do that and you have a 3-way tie for first in the Big Ten East, that's where things get really interesting.
Sure. Yeah. I guess I'm just already thinking that Penn State's not beating Michigan. I know they get them in Happy Valley. I didn't see it with the eye test with Penn State against Ohio State. And I think, look, right now, if you want to argue that splitting hairs between who's first, second, third, fourth, have at it. But it looks like right now that, and I know their schedule's not as difficult, but Michigan looks like the most complete team in the country. If you want to put Georgia there too, maybe just have them play against a team that they have to try against, and they'll show it. I understand that argument as well. Maybe Florida State, they're kind of in cruise control in the first half of games against some subpar competition. And then when they have to, they'll turn it on. And then Washington and Oregon, like I think Oregon's actually the better team. I think Washington has found a way to win that at home. But give Washington some credit, man. They've been great in like 1-score games over the last couple of years, but I think Washington's got a loss coming, whether it's at USC, at Oregon State. I think they've got a loss coming in which they'll be favored in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Washington has not impressed me the last few weeks. I mean, a very poor performance against Arizona State, very poor performance against Stanford. It was funny how both those worked. Against Arizona State, the offense was non-existent. And then against Stanford, the defense was non-existent. They escaped Oregon in a hand. Look, they played a good game. They benefited from Oregon's struggles in the red zone and then some questionable decision-making by Oregon down the stretch. And then a missed field goal. I mean, Oregon probably should have won that game, which, like you said, is why I would be picking Oregon in a rematch right now. I think our man Ryan and the comments a second ago said anybody that plays Oregon from now to the end of the year should be like fearing God. Like Oregon's going to strike the fear of God in you because I mean they are playing probably the best football out of anybody in the country right now, maybe outside of Michigan, and they're playing really really good ball. I want to ask you this, Connor, and then we can kind of transition out of this. Looking at these rankings, we've seen some teams make some runs in recent years. We have seen teams. You look at last year. I mean, TCU made the playoff. They were only ranked 7th, though. Last year in the initial set of rankings, they went from 7th into that Final Four. I think it was the first year Ohio State was like 15th, 14th, somewhere around there. Made their run, ended up winning the national championship. So just kind of looking at this initial set of rankings, what team, if there is one, could you see maybe slipping into that top 4? Let's say ranked outside of the top. I don't know. Top 9. I think Ole Miss is a little overrated there. So outside the top 9, because there is a path for Oklahoma, Bama, Texas, and everybody ahead of them. But outside the top 9, who could slip in there?
2 teams to me: Penn State and LSU. They have the ceilings to do so. Like Louisville doesn't have the strength of schedule. They also might lose a game where they're going to be a favorite in. It's Louisville this year is kind of like what Minnesota was 4 years ago, where they had a really manageable schedule and then they're breaking through and they're like the feel good team of the year. And yeah, maybe they were a little undervalued coming into the season, but they also have the path set up, and then they slip up against a team in which they're like a touchdown favorite, like a 5 or 6 point favorite against, and a game that they were projected to win at this point in the season. But then they slip up, and it's like no one's that surprised. They're still a quality team, just not playoff worthy or dark horse contender for the conference worthy. So I don't think I know Louisville has a schedule, but I don't trust them to be that team.
So I want to get to your thoughts on Penn State and LSU too. But so even if Louisville wins out as 11-1 and beats Florida State in the ACC championship game, you still don't see them slipping in there.
Yeah, because that's correct. Because I think at that point, the committee would choose the second place Big Ten East team. And then there's
with one loss, I would presume. Second place Big Ten East team with one loss, yeah.
Yeah. So like presumably Michigan beats Penn State, Michigan beats Ohio State, but that's Ohio State's only loss, something like that. And then of course, if the Pac-12, if there is a Pac-12 champion with one loss this year, say, or if it's Washington, they go undefeated, obviously that won't be a discussion. But say Oregon wins out, I think they're in the playoff. Because I think the Pac-12 is just so good this year. I think the Pac-12 has an argument to be the best conference in college football this year.
100%. They definitely are.
Yeah, exactly. And so the committee, I mean, first and foremost, the Pac-12 hasn't been this good maybe ever.
No, yeah, it's a shame they're this good in their final year of existence too.
Exactly. Right. And that storyline, especially with the Pac-12 being a Power 5 conference, you got a lot of really good teams there, and the committee's not going to argue against that. Again, because they're Power 5 teams, and because they can make some money out there out west. So they're going and they can get some revenue with the TV money. Yeah, they're going to select a one or obviously no loss team from the Pac-12. And then, of course, like I just said, you got the Big Ten East teams. You got 3 still in discussion as of right now. And then the SEC likely won't be left out. The only thing that could get interesting is if LSU were to win out, beat, let's say, Georgia in the SEC championship. Actually, no, let's say they play Missouri in the SEC championship and LSU wins. Then will the committee be looking at the SEC like, is it really that good? And you would have a 2-loss SEC champion, but it's like, but Bama's kind of down this year. LSU can't play defense. Missouri won the East. Because if Georgia wins the East and LSU wins out and LSU beats Georgia in like a classic, like 31-28, then, okay, we're going to be looking at saying, okay, LSU is a good team. They've completely turned it around. Their 2 losses are to likely 2 top 10 teams in Ole Miss and Florida State. So we're not going to leave out LSU. And there's still the discussion with Georgia. My point being, Alex, is that I don't see Louisville with even that path, even if it happens, and it's probably not. I don't see them making the playoff. If they were undefeated, sure.
Yeah, it's a valid point, and that would be interesting to see the committee do that, because if they chose the second place Big Ten East team, if they chose maybe a 1-loss Pac-12 team, like you said, maybe Oregon wins out and hands Washington their only loss in the Pac-12 championship, they would be leaving out a conference champion. They would be like disregarding the Louisville conference championship, which would be interesting. And again, it would create chaos on Selection Sunday because you could have that one-loss Pac-12 team outside the champion, that one-loss Big Ten East team that didn't even make their championship. If Florida State's only loss was to Louisville in the championship game, 11-1 Louisville at that, that's still not a horrible loss. Florida State could still make their case to get in. There is I feel like we could be on a track to having one of the more chaotic Selection Sundays that we've had in a while. There will be maybe one or two teams you feel very definite about getting in. That would probably be your Big Ten champion, whether it's Ohio State or Michigan, more than likely. And then let's say Georgia, just because I do think Georgia does end up winning the SEC.
Probably.
Those are probably your top two safest bets, Big Ten champ and Georgia, assuming they get there. Outside of that, if there's chaos in the ACC, if there's chaos in the Big 12, if there's chaos in the Pac-12, do you envision a conference getting two teams in by the time it's all said and done?
Yeah, potentially. The Big Ten, because of the Big Ten East powers. The only other situation that I could see with one conference getting two teams in is if LSU wins the SEC championship against Georgia in a really close game. And that's Georgia's, of course, only loss of the season. Then maybe the SEC.
What about if Alabama were to win out and beat an undefeated Georgia in the championship as well?
Yeah. Oh, well, obviously that could happen. Yeah. I guess I'm thinking of like on the spectrum of like what could happen and what would be like the least likely that the SEC would get two teams in if a team from the West won the SEC championship. Because, I mean, I guess we still kind of have to consider Ole Miss here because they would still be in a tiebreaker if they were to win out as well, but they're likely not going to beat Georgia in Athens. That's why I'm already kind of ruling out Ole Miss. And I agree with you, Alex, and I kind of want to transition our discussion here about like teams who are a little overrated, overvalued because their schedules. But Ole Miss, that would be a team that I would fade. And if you're into bowl mania, like Alex and I are, that'd be a team that I would be fading in the postseason because they're likely going to be playing in a bowl game against a team that's probably going to be better than them outright because of Ole Miss's schedule and how it sets up for them.
Yeah, and this is the exact same situation I think we found ourselves in with Ole Miss last year. And, I don't think we were quite to the point of being to the playoff rankings when this happened. Ole Miss, and you talked about, I know a lot on your page on Instagram, started 6-0, 7-0, whatever. And then where they go, they went 1-5 down the stretch last year. And that was just because of how the schedule set up. And it's once again done that this year. They managed to beat LSU at home. That was a good win. Lost to Alabama. Okay. Every other game, I know they got to win over Tulane. That counts as a top 25 victory. I know that was on the road. I understand that. But for the most part, it's been extremely favorable. Even the remainder of their schedule is really favorable.
That's the difference. Yeah, that's the difference between Ole Miss the last couple of years and then this year is that their schedule moving forward is actually manageable. It's not like it's like really difficult down the stretch like Washington's going to get. Washington probably has at least one of the most difficult November schedules in all of college football. I mean, they have to play at USC, Utah, at Oregon State, and then, of course, the rivalry against a team in Washington State that's falling apart right now, but they could be getting some guys back from injury. They've just had a lot of injuries here recently by the time they play Washington. And a rivalry is a rivalry no matter how the outlook is going into that game.
Absolutely. Yeah. I preach that to the masses every single year that anything can happen in a rivalry game. Like, it doesn't matter what your record is or what the stakes are. I mean, you're playing, people wake up for their rivals. But I agree. I mean, that's a tough stretch for Washington. As I mentioned, Georgia's got a tough stretch coming up with Missouri, Ole Miss, and Tennessee. And fortunately for them, two of those games are at home for Georgia. But I really agree with you on Ole Miss. And we saw that with Ole Miss last year, how they fell apart towards the end. Even this year, I was looking at the schedule. There's a good chance they finish 10-2. Probably go to a New Year's Six bowl game. I mean, the only other loss maybe coming next week to Georgia. But I agree. I probably would fade them, depending on who their opponent is. Would fade them in the postseason. Depends on opt-outs too. Everybody opts out of bowl games now. But Ole Miss gets to a Sugar Bowl, a Cotton Bowl, whatever bowl game tie-in they have.
If they made a New Year's Six bowl game, that would be one of the weakest New Year's Six Power Five, especially SEC teams that I've ever seen.
Yeah, I would have to agree. And, it's funny thing that'd be two New Year's Six bowl games for Lane Kiffin in a span of 3 years.
Yeah.
And look how bad the last one turned out. I know they had injuries, but they lost to
Baylor.
Sugar Bowl.
Yeah.
And so this year put what I'd love to see, put Ole Miss in a New Year's Six bowl game against Air Force. Let me see that Air Force rushing attack just annihilate Ole Miss's defense.
Yes, Air Force would win that game.
I agree. I would pick Air Force in that game for sure. Yeah.
Let me guess your point selection, because you're going to be in my group for a Bowl Mania on a confidence. You would pick Air Force around maybe 12-ish points.
Yeah, I wouldn't go higher than 15. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking
the lower end. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd probably have the Idaho Potato Bowl around 8 or 9 points, and then you would have Air Force at like 10, 11, or 12.
Yeah, I remember last year I was stressed out. I had a UAB over Miami, Ohio in the Bahamas Bowl, and that was my my most confident pick. I was like, let's go.
Wow.
And they didn't show up until the fourth quarter and won in the final second. So it saved me. I think I finished in third place last year. I think I got $100 out of that. So worked out pretty well.
Yeah, you and I finished second and third, and then a guy who had TCU beating Michigan finished first.
Yeah, which I don't think really anybody really saw that coming. But
right,
I guess so. Transition a little bit. We've hit a lot on the rankings. Kind of shared about how we thought the committee did. Real quick, give them a grade. A on a grading scale, A to F. What do you give them?
Overall, I think the initial rankings, I would give them a. I mean, I like most of them, so I would say a B plus.
Wow, that's pretty high, because all things considered.
Yeah, and this is something that I kind of anticipated this year, and this was something that I discussed with you in the preseason. I did not really see too many highly overrated teams this year. I thought the preseason AP poll was fairly accurate. I thought there was a couple of teams who were left out who were very undervalued, but other than that, I mean, I agreed with most of it. And every year, there is that preseason top 10 team that we're they're going to go 7-5 or 8-4 this year. They're not going to finish in the top 10. The heck, they may not even finish ranked. I didn't see that this year. Now, obviously, Clemson is disappointed, but the rest of the preseason top 10, I think all of them are going to finish ranked, and we'll see how USC finishes out, but the rest will. The rest will finish ranked. And this is one of the most accurate preseason top 10, top 15 rankings that I have seen ever. So to tell you the truth, Alex, because of that, I think there are more teams who can win the national championship this year. But at the same time, there's not that really overrated team that I'm fading down the stretch. Oh my gosh, this team is not even this good. What are they doing that high in the rankings? I don't really see that this year.
Yeah, and that's really why I think it's a shame that we don't have the 12-team playoff this year. So there's so many good teams, and it really. And here's the thing: they could have changed it this year. Let's be honest; they could change it tonight if they wanted to. It's not that hard to arrange for the 12-team playoff. It's not, but it's a money thing, whatever. But yeah, I mean, the sad thing is you talk about how deep the Pac-12 is, how deep the Big Ten. Because here's the bottom line: I haven't been impressed with Penn State the last few weeks. But would I rank them as a top 12 team in terms of getting into 12-team playoff? Yeah, I would. I'd put them in as of right now. I would. So, those three teams should be in there. You've got Georgia, Missouri is playing good ball, Alabama, LSU. There's so many teams that deserve that shot at a national title, and we're cutting 8 of them. We're limiting it to 4. And I genuinely hope we don't have I like chaos. I want to have a little pressure, a little anxiety on Selection Sunday, but I hope we don't run into another Baylor TCU type situation where we feel like a team like this, like TCU was that year, got robbed of getting in because of a weak strength of schedule, not by their own doing, but because of their conference, or because of one maybe bad loss that they took earlier in the year, not right before the playoff committee decided on their Final Four, things like that. This was the year. Next year's going to be great. Don't get me wrong. We'll probably be back in the same situation again. But this was a year where a 12-team playoff would have been outstanding.
Yeah, and then when you look back at 2014 and the whole situation with TCU missing out, the team that jumped over them, leapfrogged them in the rankings was Ohio State, and they ended up winning the national championship. So whenever I look back to that, I'm like, well, I mean, that would have been a perfect opportunity for an expanded playoff, but obviously that was the initial year. But I mean, the team who leapfrogged him ended up winning the national championship. So when I look back, I'm like, well, but then Ohio State.
Yeah, you can't make that. Yeah, you can't be too upset about it because I mean, Ohio State proved everybody wrong or proved them right that they deserve to be in there, and I'll give them credit for that. I think there have been some cases in years, but I don't know. I'm hoping this year with the four that we get, whatever combination of the four it is, we have some solid games. I think that's been a lot of people's biggest gripe, and I think a major reason why we're expanding the playoffs is not just because of allowing other teams opportunities where if you lose 2 games, your season's over. That mindset is going to be gone starting next year, but also the fact that the playoff games have just kind of sucked the last couple of years. Last year was really good. Both games, semifinals were fantastic.
Yeah, it's like the first time ever.
Yeah, honestly, it was. I mean, for the majority of the time, you might get lucky if you get one good game, but you can think back. I mean, a lot of Alabama's wins in the semifinals were blowouts. The win over Washington, the win over Michigan State, the win over Oklahoma. Then you had LSU's win over Oklahoma, which, again, some of the worst playoff games we've ever seen involved Lincoln Riley and Oklahoma. Funny how that works.
Yeah.
It's not a coincidence that the same kind of thing is happening during his time at USC, a lack of defense. So, but that is a major reason why I think we've all kind of been a lot of us have been advocating for that expanded playoff. Is yes, you're going to have some blowouts in those games, especially when your group of 5 team that is the 12th seed has to travel to Eugene to play Oregon or has to play Ohio State. Yeah, you might be a blowout. They might see a couple in there, but more likely than not, you're going to have closer games, more competitive games, better atmospheres, and you might even have a handful of upsets in there. Which I'm all for. Everybody loves upsets when March Madness rolls around. Why would it be any different when the college football playoff rolls around?
The only thing that would be different is that we wouldn't have as many upsets in college football as we do with college basketball, because the floor, or I should say from the middle of the pack of like the good teams in college basketball, they're closer together than the middle of the pack of the good teams in college football, because from like tier 1 to tier 2 in college football is a much bigger drop off than from tier 1 to tier 2 in college basketball. So,
no doubt.
Yeah. And this is my opinion. I'm sure it's a popular opinion, but I don't think there's any postseason like March Madness for college basketball. That is the best postseason in all sports, in my opinion.
I would wholeheartedly agree. That is the best there is, plain and simple. I mean, really, it's unlike anything else I've ever seen. You got the bracket challenges, you got the constant upsets, and that is why, again, I am so excited about a 12-team playoff. Will it be anything like March Madness? No, it won't be. Obviously not as many teams, not as many games. Actually, speaking of a 12-team playoff, they're on ESPN right now, just showing what a 12-team playoff would look like if it were to happen today. And I'm telling you, these matchups would be great. I mean, you'd have like Michigan and Tulane, Oklahoma and Alabama, Oregon and Penn State, Ole Miss and Texas. All of those would be fantastic matchups. And those games I just mentioned would be on the campus of the higher seeded team.
Do you know what bowl matchup that I want to see happen this year?
Would be Oklahoma and USC?
Well, I mean, you could talk about a matchup like that. Sure. Yeah, that would be interesting. But I'll give you a hint here with where I'm going with this. 2 teams that I talked about in the preseason with you on this show, probably more than anybody else.
Oh, you want to see Missouri and Oregon State?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's go Beavers and Tigers, the right Tigers. Let's go.
That would be fun, man. It'd be a heck of a game. And, okay, we'll transition to that, because I know we've got a hard cutoff time tonight, and I know you wanted to get into some of that. So those of you that are watching, we appreciate you being here. We're not done. We're just transitioning topics. We appreciate being here. Make sure to like the stream while you're here. Hit that subscribe button as we continue our talk with College Football Encyclopedia. You came on a couple months ago. You were talking about a handful of teams that had caught your eye that you're looking forward to watching this year. And we'll start with the 2 you just mentioned. Missouri and Oregon State come in at number 12 and number 16, the initial set of rankings. Just kind of your takes on both of those programs so far. Have they lived up to your expectations, fallen a little short, and maybe the outlook for both of them the rest of the year?
Start with the Beavers. I thought this team would be DAM good this year, and I think they've been good. They haven't quite lived up to my expectation. They've got a terrific offensive line. They've been really good for most of the season. Pass blocking hasn't been quite as good as I was hoping, but it's still been a really good offensive line nonetheless. Really, every single position group for Oregon State has done exactly what I thought it would do, except for one, and that has been the defensive line. Now, you could talk about the corners and how the cornerback played and the secondary has dropped off from last year, but that was predictable. I was really hoping this Oregon State defensive line, it's been fine. They've already gotten more sacks than they did all of last year. It's been fine. It has improved, but I was really hoping like this would be like like 3 steps with like in terms of improvement, 3 steps up and improvement from last year, and it hasn't been. It's been probably the best Oregon State defensive line in a really long time. That's not the highest bar to clear, but it's been good. I was hoping it was going to be great because the depth on the defensive line was great. A lot of upperclassmen and they're pretty fast. Like they're not like the biggest guys, but they're pretty fast. Like they have a couple really good defensive ends, and I think their defensive tackles are pretty mobile. They can somewhat get out in space and clog A and B gaps pretty well. They're pretty mobile guys. So I was expecting more from the defensive line, especially to create havoc, because I didn't think the secondary was going to be quite as good as what it was a year ago, to where they could kind of, sit on islands, so to speak, like the corners who could be out there. They could cover for a couple of extra seconds. I didn't think they were going to be that good this year, and they have not been. But I thought the defensive line would be a little bit better. The biggest disappointment with me with the Beavers this year has been the level of play on the road. Because when you look at this schedule, this was a team that I told you who I thought could start either 9-1 or 10-0. And most likely they'll start 8-2 in the first 10 games. They'll probably win their next 2. And while that's quality, that's good for Oregon State. Like we're talking about Oregon State, who just a few years ago was finishing with losing records. Okay. So, I mean, I'm not saying like it's been a complete down year or it's been a complete disappointment, but when you look at the schedule, I thought there was a greater chance this team would start 10-0 than 8-2. And they've come up short on the road against 2 teams who have quality pieces, overachieved at least at certain parts of the season to a degree in Washington State and Arizona, but they should not be at the level of at least this year's roster for Oregon State. And Oregon State, they're like a Minnesota 4 years ago, kind of. You have an opportunity with your schedule to kind of max out. Like maybe you're a little overvalued by the time the season ends, but you have the chance to get those wins against teams who you should be beating. Maybe you don't blow them out, but you find ways to win. You take care of business, and then maybe you pull off 1 or 2 upsets in there and you finish with double-digit wins. Maybe that happens because, as I mentioned before, they're a much better home team. And again, to go back to that schedule, their home and away splits were really manageable this year. Like the majority of their most difficult games, except for Oregon, were at home. And they didn't face Oregon until the very last game of the season. So am I a little bit disappointed? Yes. Are they still living up to their power rating? Yes. I just thought they could have maxed out a little bit better.
Yeah, I think it's a fair assessment. Like you said, that this is to me, they're very similar to Utah in the sense of they're so dominant at home, but a completely different team on the road. And that's kind of been the case for the Utes traditionally over these last couple of years. But obviously they're playing solid football. The losses that they have, though, it's one of those things like if you're Oregon State and you're going to lose 2 games, I feel like you'd rather lose to more quality opponents than Washington State, who is just tanking. It didn't look bad at the time, but is tanking now. And Arizona, who is a much better team than their record indicates. We know that. We've seen that. I think they actually might pull off the upset against UCLA this Saturday. But you feel like, okay, if I'm going to have 2 losses, I'd rather it be to Utah and Washington or Washington and Oregon than these 2 teams, because it's almost like a what could have been type of year for the Beavers, especially if they close out the year with, 3 or winning all these games. They still got Washington on deck, like you said, which could create chaos, not just in the Pac-12, but for the playoff standings as well. And then Oregon, which could do the same thing. Oregon State actually has an opportunity to do the funniest thing ever, which would be to maybe not live up to the expectations from this preseason, but single-handedly eliminate the Pac-12 from the playoff while not making it themselves.
Yeah. And what's interesting with Oregon State, they'll probably win their next 2 games. They may or may not cover spreads, but they'll win most likely, and they'll get Washington at home. man, maybe this might seem bold to some people right now. I think Oregon State's going to win that game. I like the way they match up. The only matchup I don't like for Oregon State in that game is the Washington receivers against their DBs. But what I love in that matchup, obviously Oregon State's at home, but Oregon State, they can totally control the tempo of that game. They can totally control the tempo and keep possession of the ball more than Washington to a degree to win, say, like 38-31 or 31-28, where maybe like Oregon State is the team that maintains that 3 to 4 to 7 point lead, like how Washington did against Oregon for the majority of that game. Then, of course, Oregon came back at the end. Washington reclaimed the lead. But imagine if Oregon State, being the home team in this example, they get that crowd. They get that crowd edge. They have the atmosphere there, and they're able to pull out like a one-score game. I could totally see that happening. And then, Alex, you gave me a little bit of hope a little earlier when you said anything can happen in a rivalry game, because that means Oregon State could take it to the Ducks for the second year in a row. Of course, do I really think that's going to happen? No. But it would be like you said, it would create chaos, and it would be a nice story for Oregon State to finish 10-2, play for the Pac-12 championship, and have a shot to win a Pac-12 championship, because this is the best Oregon State. This is at least the most complete Oregon State roster that they've had since the early 2000s, I guess.
Yeah. When did they make was it the Rose Bowl? Was it like the late 90s, like 2001, I think?
Yeah, it was the early 2000s.
Yeah, I think like 01, 02, somewhere around there. Yeah. Yeah. So it's credit to Jonathan Smith and the rebuild that he's doing there. And again, I like the possibility. I do and don't, right? Like, here's the thing. We've talked all year long about the Pac-12 just cannibalizing themselves, and that's the issue, right? I mean, Oregon's so good. Washington's so good. USC, while not as good as we thought they'd be, could still beat Washington this Saturday, still has to play Oregon. And that's the thing, right? The top teams in the conference have yet to play each other. The biggest games of the Pac-12 have yet to even happen. Oregon-Washington was the first big one. But now you've got Washington and USC. Then you've got USC and Oregon. Washington, Oregon State, Oregon. All those games, like, do I think the favorites are going to win those games every time? No. So the Pac-12 wants so badly to get a team into the playoff, and a conference this deep and this good should get a team into the playoff. But I very well could see it being a case, kind of similar to last year, where maybe you have a one-loss, say Washington, a one-loss Washington playing a two-loss Oregon, or a one-loss Oregon playing a two-loss Washington, whatever. Last year we saw that happen, where if USC had defeated Utah, they would have gone to the playoff. But Utah, with no playoff aspirations of themselves, beat USC and ruined the Pac-12 college football playoff hopes. So I very well could see that happening again this year. Honestly, it would be so unfortunate, but also the most fitting way for this conference to come to a close. Yeah.
And Oregon State losing to both Washington State and Arizona really hurts, because I think there was a decent chance for Oregon State to split their last two games and have like a backdoor to the Pac-12 championship. They may not win it, but they could get there. They're going to have to win out to get there now, because if they lose any game moving forward, even if they were to go 3-1 down the stretch, hit the over on their preseason win total, finish as a top 15 team, they're still likely not going to play for the Pac-12 championship because they slipped up and won too many games beforehand. So
yeah, it'd be 3 conference losses, and you definitely will stand a chance to get in with that. Want to switch gears a little bit. Talk about one of those other teams that you mentioned as we slowly wind things down tonight. You talked about Missouri a lot in the preseason. The Tigers are 12th in the initial set of rankings, which is extremely high for them. The Tigers, man, have an opportunity to pull off some chaos. If they were to go on the road and beat Georgia this Saturday, keep in mind, they gave Georgia maybe the toughest test of the year last year in Columbia. Missouri would propel themselves into the top 6 more than likely, and would be viewed as a legitimate playoff contender, which we all thought Missouri would be pretty good in the preseason, but I don't know, did we think they'd be this good at this point of the year?
Yes. I thought there was a chance. I may have been the only one talking about this outside of Missouri fans, but I thought they had the ceiling. Because remember, I talked with you 2 months ago, and I said they probably won't reach their ceiling, but they do have a ceiling of like double-digit wins this year, because I thought they had some of the most undervalued talent in the entire country. I thought this was, if you're into college football futures, if you're into betting, I thought this was one of the best over bets in all of college football. It was 6.5 from Missouri. It was also plus odds in a lot of sports books. I thought, I mean, maybe you're taking a chance on Eli Drinkwitz because he's never really lived up to the talent there, but they had all the talent in store this year. When you look at the offensive line, is it special? No, but they may have a first or second round pick in Foster. They got a couple of transfers over the offseason, which plugged some holes in the interior of the offensive line, which was the issue last year. So they had better depth there, quality experience, a lot of senior-laden experience too. Then the receiving core, which was probably the most undervalued receiving core in the SEC East, only because Missouri had the talent to be the best and they weren't getting talked about it in that way. I mean, obviously Luther Burden's been the guy, but everybody was talking about losing Lovett, who transferred to Georgia. And I think I talked about this with you. I know I talked about it on my page. I said, yeah, but the guy replacing him is better. And Burden was going to be featured in the slot this year. And in fact, you might remember a story that I had on my Instagram a couple months ago before the season started. I said, and we'll discuss, like when the preseason AP Top 25 came out, I had a graphic of Luther Burden saying, and we'll discuss the teams who could break through and finish from unranked to top 10. And I had a picture of Luther Burden. I was obviously hinting towards Missouri, but I was also trying to hint towards Luther Burden could be like a huge player that would be responsible for that. He's going to be the featured receiver in the Missouri offense this year in the slot, and he had a higher ceiling than Lovett did. And then you got quality guys around him like Mookie Cooper, Theo Weiss. You had some depth there. And then the running back room, I don't think it's great, but you had some senior leadership there. Brady Cook, no one remembers this. No one talked about this, but he played with like he played like with a torn shoulder all of last year, basically, since like the second game against K-State. And so he was coming back. He was going to be fully healthy. And then, as you know, Alex, I talked about their defense, I thought the Missouri defense was like the most undervalued position group in the entire country going into this year.
Yeah, I think that's an extra point. Luther Burden was a guy that I think last year wasn't fully utilized to his potential, right? We saw flashes of brilliance in Luther Burden in 2022, but not fully to the extent that we wanted. And that was maybe a mixture of not utilizing the way he needed, but also just kind of poor quarterback play. That, to me, was the biggest question mark for Missouri entering the year, right? We knew, you talked about the defense. The defense was always going to be strong. They had so much returning talent, expected to be good, a lot of draft picks, as you mentioned. Was the offense going to finally take off? Even entering the preseason, we didn't exactly know who was going to be quarterback. I mean, a lot of us believed it would be Brady Cook just because of the continuity, because he was the guy last year. But we thought Jake Garcia might be able to challenge for that. Thought there might be a couple of challengers in there as well. And yet Cook got it and has been lights out this year, living up to his potential, what he can do fully healthy, and then obviously giving Luther Burden his shot in the slot. And look what he's done, almost 1,000 receiving yards on the year.
But that's another thing. Like, Missouri has quality quarterback depth. So if something were to happen to Brady Cook, it's like, okay, well, then they throw in another guy. At least, going into the season, it's like, well, they all have like a decent floor. Like, it's not like there's a huge drop-off from QB1 to QB2. And what's his name? Bud Elliott talks about this on the Cover 3 Summer School. He always discusses, when he interviews these people that are representing their respective universities, he always discusses like, okay, what position group on the team has the biggest drop-off from the first string to the second string outside of quarterback? Because the answer for practically every team is going to be quarterback. There's always a drop-off from QB1 to QB2. And that's almost always substantial drop-off. At this point in the season, I would anticipate there to be a substantial drop-off in quarterback play from Missouri, only because of what Brady Cook's been able to do. But if you look at that quarterback room, it was honestly quietly undervalued from a depth perspective, because like Garcia's talented. Who's the other guy?
Sam Horn in there.
Yeah, Horn's talented. So they had a high floor when you look at QB2 and QB3. Maybe not a high ceiling, but I just thought every single position group on this team outside of maybe defensive end was set. And defensive end's been decent. It's been good enough. But I just think that they are set in place at every single position. Are they elite? Like, as a team? No, but they've got some elite players, and then they don't have any outright weaknesses. I just thought this team, especially with the East this year, I know I told you I didn't think South Carolina was going to be that good. Florida wasn't going to be that good. I talked about their cross-division games. LSU was going to be tough, but Arkansas looked manageable to me. I wasn't sure how they were going to turn out this year. Now, I didn't think Arkansas was going to struggle to this degree, but I was sold on Missouri a lot more than a lot of the teams in their schedule when you look at like their 50-50 games, at least in the preseason. I thought this was one of the best over bets in college football. And yeah, I think their ceiling is double-digit wins. I thought it was, and I certainly think it is.
Yeah, I mean, outside of I say that this is going to be a very telling stretch for Missouri, right? They're playing really good football right now, but you've got Georgia coming up this week. Still got to play Tennessee. Still got to play Florida. Very winnable games, too. I really haven't been all that impressed with Tennessee this year. Another 17th in the country. But haven't looked great at times. Just barely got by Kentucky. Barely got by Texas A&M and Knoxville. They looked great against Alabama for a half and then could get nothing going in the second half. So it's kind of one of those things where you don't know which Tennessee is going to show up. And obviously, this is nowhere near the same offense or team as a whole than they were last year. The East, I really think the East will. I know Missouri's got Florida and Georgia. Florida's out. I know Tennessee's still in the mix because they haven't played Georgia either. Right. But I think the SEC East is decided this Saturday between Georgia and Missouri.
Yeah, I agree with that. And something else to keep in mind, and you're going to see this as a common theme with me when I'm predicting breakthrough teams. They're home and away splits. What do they look like? Because in college football, I mean, and really mostly every single college sport, really every sport at every level, but college football, it weighs so heavily, college basketball too, honestly. Home and away games, I mean, just a lot of people think, oh, this team is not that good, so if we're playing them at their place, we should win. It doesn't matter where we play, we should win. Well, I mean, from looking at it from a power rating perspective, yeah, you would think so, but it's not as easy as that. You got to go on the road and take care of business, and you got to keep in mind we're talking, for the most part, of course, we got some super seniors right now, but for the most part, we're talking 18 to 22-year-olds having to adjust their time schedules, their sleep schedules, but potentially they're maybe some of them have their meal plan, so they've already got like their food situation figured out, but some of them have to change a little bit of their eating habits or like the times they eat. Your schedules overall get thrown off. And then you have to go on top of that. You got to go on the road away from home. You got to go to sometimes an electric atmosphere, even if that team you're playing is not that great. And you got to take care of business. And what do we see? When we see upsets, oftentimes it's the home underdogs, and they do so by minimum margins. It's because on a neutral field, they're probably not pulling off the upset, but they have just enough to squeak by at home. That's why you got to look at those home and away splits. And when you look at Oregon State, Missouri, the majority of their difficult games are at home. Now, obviously, Missouri has to play at Georgia. My prediction for Missouri wasn't they were going to win the East. I thought they had a ceiling to get to double-digit wins, but it's not like I was predicting them in the preseason. They're going to go into Athens and beat Georgia. That's not what I'm going to be predicting here. I'm looking at an overall season here, game by game, yes, but really taking into account, okay, who do you play at home? Who do you play on the way? Are the away teams substantially worse than you? And then are your home games, you get the 50-50 games at home, or from like a team who I think could break through a little undervalued, do you get some of your more difficult games at home?
I think that is a very good point and something to keep in mind more so as we advance into next year with all the conference realignment. We're going to enter a stage, not just in the Big Ten, but the SEC now adding Oklahoma and Texas, the Big Ten adding 4 teams, the ACC bringing in. I mean, look, you're about to run into issues now where California is going to be playing Miami, Rutgers is going to be playing USC. And I don't care if you're traveling east to west. Either way, one of those teams is traveling across the country, coast to coast, for a game. And you talk about messing up people's schedules. You're messing up. I mean, most teams, you got a road game within your region. You might fly out on a Thursday, get down there Thursday night, whatever. These teams are going to have to start leaving like on a Wednesday. I mean, some of these things, I'm not saying distance-wise, but it's going to be the equivalent of a team playing in Hawaii. Long flights, layovers, whatever, to get to your destination, get acclimated to the time zone, get acclimated to the change of scenery, whatever it may be, and then get ready to play a football game, get focused. And then when you're done, win or lose, hop back on that plane and fly all the way back. And then, I mean, I think about this like in the NFL, you see teams now, or NBA, it's like which NBA, granted, they play so many teams, so many games closer together than football. But take NFL, you got New England, you got the Patriots. They got a game in Vegas to play the Raiders. And let's say the next week they had to play the Cardinals down in Arizona. Well, they're not going to fly all the way back to New England for that.
Right.
They're going to stay out west. And are we going to see that with the schedule makers in college football, where if I'm USC and I got to play Rutgers, and then the next week I got to play Penn State, am I really going to fly all the way back to the US? No, you're not. So you got these guys now that are going to be staying possibly weeks, at least a week or two on the road. It's a really, really bad system, but a very great example about the importance of those home and away splits, not just from like a mental standpoint, but also just from like a win-loss standpoint as well.
And I want to see Lincoln Riley teams play in the snow. I want to see Iowa in like late November, and I want to see them have to adjust to that style of play and that kind of weather, and that'd be great.
That's the beauty of it, man. I'm telling you, you take. Here's the thing: the Midwest schools that are so used to playing in the snow and the freezing cold and things like that, the teams that have been the big team, they will be just fine going out and play in sunny California in the middle of November. That's not going to faze them. But you bring those California boys over to Wisconsin or Penn State or whatever, and it's pouring snow, or it's wet and foggy and 27 degrees, no snow, just cold. Yeah, let's see how you do then.
Right.
It's going to be very, very interesting to see how that plays out.
And I do want to discuss one more thing with you. We were talking about at the very beginning of this show here, we were discussing the G5 teams, mostly Air Force and Tulane, and their New Year's Six potential of representing the G5. One other team that I would say aware of that I would keep in mind for this is SMU. I remember I had a post about SMU in Memphis way back like in May or June. I talked about with the conference realignment with the American Athletic Conference this year, they're bringing in some Conference USA teams. I really liked how Memphis and SMU's schedule set up for them. Now, for Memphis' sake, they've already had 2 losses. But for SMU, of course, both teams had the manageable schedules. I liked Memphis's home and away splits. Their away games were very manageable, and their home games, they were getting all their tougher games at home. And then for SMU, they avoid UTSA, they avoid Tulane, and they do have to play at Memphis. But SMU, as of right now at least, they look like the better team. And you have to keep in mind, like the previous years in the American Athletic Conference, SMU and Memphis were like best of the rest because you had Cincinnati and UCF up there and Houston a few times. But then all 3 of those left to the Big 12. And you had UTSA, who brought back a lot of their production this year, had some injuries, but they're getting back to being a little healthier now. But obviously, Tulane was bringing back Michael Pratt and a few others. You had UTSA, like I just mentioned. And then there's SMU and Memphis with some of the more manageable schedules in the entire G5. And, of course, Memphis, again, they had a little bit of a more difficult conference slate because they had to play Tulane. Then, of course, they got the non-conference against Missouri. SMU had a difficult non-con with 2 road games against TCU and Oklahoma. But the way SMU's schedule sets up, if they were to win out, play the winner of the UTSA and Tulane game in the American Athletic Conference Championship and win that, there is a chance. I mean, unless Air Force wins out, there is a slight chance SMU represents the G5.
That's actually a really interesting point. I don't think I even myself haven't thought too much on that. SMU is obviously clicking as a well-oiled machine. That offense is absolutely electric. I think
their defense is good too. It's not bad.
Was that now Memphis?
SMU's defense is not half bad.
The defense isn't bad at all. Yeah, and that Memphis game is going to be key here in a few weeks. That's going to be the difference maker. That's the one thing the committee will have to decide, right? If SMU does win out, beats, let's say Tulane for the sake of the argument, beats Tulane, who's ranked 24th as of right now, that would mean that SMU is the 2-loss American champion. The only other contender in the group of 5 is Air Force. And that's where I would be interested to see. The committee clearly values Air Force enough to rank them 25th, but strength of schedule in the Mountain West really isn't all that great. And I'm going to pull up Air Force's schedule real quick. I don't think they play anybody else super noteworthy.
Boise State.
Other than Boise, who's been wildly disappointing this year, 4-4, maybe has a winning record by that point, that Friday after Thanksgiving. Maybe he has to play them again in the championship game. Fresno again, whoever it may be. What will be very interesting to see is a one-loss Air Force. Would they get the nod over a two-loss American champion in SMU or even Tulane? That would be what I would be really interested to see.
It depends if Air Force has the one loss in the Mountain West Championship. Like if they have one loss and it was in the Mountain West Championship, then no, I think the winner of the American, if it's SMU in this case, I think SMU would get the nod. But if Air Force, let's say they slip up in the regular season finale, I believe they have to play at Boise, but they still play for the Mountain West Championship. They get a rematch, maybe against Boise, because there's no divisions this year in the Mountain West, or they just simply win the Mountain West Championship no matter who they play. Then maybe they do. If maybe they do, because guess who is the highest power rated G5 team in the country right now?
Power rate, would that be Tulane? Is that Tulane or Air Force?
It might be SMU, actually.
Still highest ranked power rate despite two losses.
Yeah, let me look real quick.
While he's looking, he makes a valid point. Air Force is 8-0. I like Air Force a lot. I've actually got them ranked 16th in my rankings. I know the strength of schedule is not nearly as good as others, but they have won. What's impressed me the most about Air Force is the fact they've won all but one game. And that one game that they did not was Wyoming, where they lost their quarterback. They've won all but one game by double digits. They're blowing these teams out of the wild. Or out of the water. It's just been dominating from left to right. Say Air Force were to slip up, you're right. It would have to be in the regular season because it has to be a highest ranked Group of 5 champion. You have to win your conference to get in.
Right.
If Air Force doesn't win the conference, even if they finish 12-1 with that conference loss or coming in the championship game, they wouldn't get to go, which would be really, really unfortunate.
Yep. So I just looked at the power ratings, not the actual rankings.
Sure.
Ratings with a T. So I'm bringing the T here. SMU is 19th in power ratings. The next highest rated G5 team, you have to go all the way down to, let's see, 46. There's Air Force.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know what I would pitch? What I would pitch in this scenario, if the committee can't decide, let's have a play-in game. Put like Air Force against SMU, Air Force against Tulane. Like if it's so close, because then honestly, I do wonder what you would do. Like if we just saw upsets, like let's say Air Force loses in the championship game. Let's say the American champion isn't ranked. So then you just got a bunch of unranked Group of 5 teams running around. You just take the best record of the Group of 5 champions. Like, oh, Troy finished 11-2. They're not ranked. We'll put them in the Cotton Bowl. Like I would love to know what would happen if you don't have a highest ranked champion because there are no ranked champions. I'd love to know what the committee would do in that scenario. I say you do a mini playoff of its own. Winner gets in and goes to the New Year's Six Bowl. That's what I would be for.
I want to know your thoughts on this. Do you think that this year there is a larger discrepancy between the Power 5 and the G5 than what we've seen for the last handful of years?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, you did that. You did that with realignment. I mean, when you look back in recent years, the Sun Belt's growing and getting better. James Madison's solid. Troy's solid. App State's been good. And it has. I'm not saying there is a super wide, but like the best teams we've thought of in recent years when it comes to those New Year's Six Bowl berths have come from the American. It's been UCF. Right. It's been Houston. It's been Cincinnati. It's been those teams. They're all gone to the Power 5 now, and none of them performing very well. Mountain West, occasionally has a couple decent teams in there. Fresno hasn't been bad in recent years. Boise traditionally is good. They got Air Force now, but none of them have challenged for that New Year's Six box for Boise about 10 years ago. Max out of the equation. Great games on the night in the snow, but they're never going to contend. Outside of Western Michigan that one year, I'll give them credit for that.
Right.
But bottom line, at Conference USA is garbage. Sun Belt has a handful of teams, but the best team in there right now can't even go bowling. So the realignment structuring took away some of the better teams. those teams at UCF, Cincinnati, Houston would be performing better in the American just because it's a weaker conference in the Big 12. Therefore, yeah, there is a bit of a discrepancy there. There's a bit of a larger gap than there's been in years past.
And we talked a little bit earlier about like how good we think each Power 5 conference is. What G5 conference do you think is best to worst?
I think the best currently, I definitely would probably lean Sun Belt. Would probably and the worst currently is Conference USA. That is just a very weak conference. I know Liberty's in there, but like we discussed in the preseason, Liberty we knew was going to be solid. Had such a favorable. You're going to have a weak conference when you've got 2 or 3 new teams in from the FCS. Jacksonville State and Jacksonville State's playing good ball. Don't get me wrong, they are. But Jacksonville State's in there. Sam Houston's in there. Florida International, Middleton. I mean, come on, what are we doing here?
I'm pretty sure 6 of the 9 Conference USA teams are power rated in the triple digits.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
And I think, I have it pulled up right here. Let's see. There's one team that, Jacksonville State's like right outside the triple digits. They're at 94. And then, Western Kentucky's at 88th. And then Liberty, I think they're a little bit higher than this. They've kind of created some separation. Yeah, Liberty is at 56th.
Okay. Yeah. And, I wish Liberty would have their shot. I wish Liberty would have their shot at a New Year's Six bowl game. But the Conference USA is just so weak. I would not be shocked if the committee did not rank them at all this year. And if they did rank them, it wouldn't come until later in the year when they're 11-0, undefeated. And even then it would be 24th, 25th. It'd be very low end just because they haven't beaten anybody. Yeah,
and it would literally, like you said, it would be at 24th or 25th just to say, hey, we ranked them.
Right. Yeah. Just get them off my back. Like stop. Harassing me, Liberty. Here you go. We gave you what you wanted. You're 25th. Congrats. But that is something I have to keep in mind that if you rank Liberty, you open the door for them to get that New Year's Six bowl spot in the event of chaos in the American or Mountain West. If Tulane and Air Force tank and struggle, and you say, all right, Liberty, here you go, and then they lose, it's like, oh crap, now Liberty's going to a New Year's Six bowl game.
Yeah, imagine this. So SMU loses to Memphis. Then UTSA beats Tulane. So UTSA would play for the American Athletic Conference Championship. I don't know I don't know how it would be decided who would be the opponent there with the tiebreakers there. Maybe still Tulane because they beat Memphis head to head.
Yeah.
And then whoever wins that game, it's like, well, UTSA, since they've been healthy, they've been playing well, but it's like they're still not that great of a team. And Tulane's been playing down to their opponent's level the whole entire season. So regardless of who wins that game at that point, and then of course I know they didn't have Michael Pratt, but Tulane still lost to Ole Miss by a decent margin, although the game was closer than that, really, than the final score set against Ole Miss. Yeah, Alex, it would create a ton of chaos for the G5 there. But I asked you the question because I have the same thought here. I don't think the G5 this year is as nearly as competitive at the top as what it has been in years past.
No, not even close. No, it is I guess you could call it a down year for the G5. No doubt about it.
Yeah, and I asked you the question, who you thought was the best G5 conference, and you said the Sun Belt, and I agree with you. But it just feels like the top conference this year in the G5 is it's the worst top conference that I have seen in the playoff era. And like you mentioned, a lot of it has to do with conference realignment, obviously, but there's no this terrific G5 team that we're looking at okay, they could beat a lot of Power 5 teams. Maybe some people think about that with Tulane and Air Force, but quite frankly, I don't.
No, I would agree with you on that as well. There's just a bit of a discrepancy.
Yeah, and I'm not complaining because this is going to help me in Bowl Mania. There's a couple of conferences, and for those of you watching, we've given you a couple hints of what conferences to fade in bowl season, because there's just a couple that they're just not good this year. And there's a couple of those conferences who are going to get a handful of, not just one or two, a handful of teams into bowl season because of how bad the bottom teams are in the conference, and then how weak their strength of schedules are overall, including the non-con. So it's going to increase their win total, get them to a bowl game, and they're going to get beat in a bowl game, and it's probably not going to be close. And I just think this year in college football, the discrepancy, as we were just discussing, is just so much larger between the Power 5 and the G5, but also from like tier 2 to tier 3. But like tier 1 and tier 2, the drop off in college football is not as much, which is why I also said earlier, I think we could have more teams in the hunt for the national championship.
Right. I think it's a fair assessment. Listen to Connor, guys. I mean, when Bowl Mania comes around, he doesn't give out too many picks. He's a competitive guy, especially once that group starts. But he knows his stuff. Connor, we're gonna wrap things up because, like I said, I had to do a hard count, and I got somewhere to be at 8, unfortunately. But just want to rehash again the college football playoff rankings. First set was tonight. Ohio State 1, Georgia 2, Michigan 3, Florida State 4. Any real quick, Connor, just parting words on the set of rankings tonight, as well as plug in College Football Encyclopedia?
I do not disagree with those rankings. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, we're literally splitting hairs on these teams, and it's going to be decided over the next month. And as of now, those have looked like the 4 best teams. And if I had to guess, I would say those are going to be the 4 playoff teams, unless there is a 1-loss Pac-12 champion that separates itself, and say Ohio State looks fairly questionable against Michigan. Michigan wins that game decisively, and there's no more chaos in the Big Ten East. Then I think there's a good chance we see these 4 teams, maybe again like Oregon, maybe Washington gets in there. But I think the top 6, you're probably going to get 4 of those 6 teams in the playoff.
I think it's a fair assessment. I know people are going to point at the Big 12. I think the Big 12, similar to the Pac-12, is going to start to cannibalize itself. This is a huge weekend for them, as we mentioned, with Bedlam, with Kansas State and Texas. It's going to start working itself out there, where there's a chance that the Big 12 championship is just going to be a play-in for a New Year's Six bowl game and not the playoff. I do think, I don't know, I want to say a Pac-12 team's getting in there. Oregon's really, really impressing me. I don't know if anybody else is beating Oregon down the stretch.
Oregon State.
Maybe Oregon State. Hey, they did it last year. You can't rule them out. But they get to host USC. Oregon State might be tough at season. Then I still think they're going to beat them. So if they end up having a rematch against Washington's the only team that could beat Oregon in a rematch. Utah's not going to do it.
No.
Oregon State's not going to do it. USC is not going to do it. So, and again, you put them on a neutral side. I side with Oregon. So watch out for the Ducks. I know they're the lower ranked team right now, but they could easily find themselves into the top 4 and replace Ohio State or Michigan, the loser of that game, I guess. And again, the beauty of this is it's Halloween night. We've got a whole month of football left. And, what you're seeing now, what you saw tonight, going to drastically change by season's end. So, Connor, real quick, plug your channel, man. Plug your page. You want to get you some exposure.
It's Halloween night, so I'm going to give y'all guys some scary good predictions or some scary good takes here. I'm 17 of 20 on my preseason. It looks like I'm going to be about 17 of 20 on my preseason takes when you look at the Encyclopedia 8, the progression, regression, and then those takes that I make, like with the graphics, like at least one of these 4 teams won't make a bowl game, or like one of these teams that had like a 2-10 or 3-9 record will make a bowl game. Yeah, I'm looking like right now I'll go 17 of 20 potentially, maybe 16 of 20, which I would not complain with. You can get all of these, it's Halloween night, scary good predictions on CFE Grind. That's College Football Encyclopedia Grind on Instagram. That's my college football page that I've been running now for a couple of years, and I post graphics regularly on there. So check out my content, and I will more than likely, if I know who you are, like you could DM me and I'll probably figure out who you are. I'll give you a follow back, and do make sure to check out my page. Like I said, I have some decent looking graphics. I'm trying to get better at that. So thank you, Alex, again for having me on the show again, and cannot wait to watch Missouri and Oregon State playing the national championship.
Hey, there we go. The 12th, 16th team, they're going to find their way into the top 4 somehow. It's bound to happen.
Right.
They're going to pull off some upsets down the road, and they're getting in.
Yeah, that's right. There's going to be a ton of chaos Nationally, it's going to open up. Of course, Missouri, if they win out, they'll have a chance to get there. And then, of course, Oregon State, they'll definitely win out 110%. They'll beat Washington and Oregon, no problem. They'll take care of business in Eugene. I don't know. I would have them favored by like 17.5 there.
Oh, easy money.
Yeah, and then they'll beat whoever they play in the Pac-12 championship handily. They'll get in.
Hey, it's going to be 2007 all over again, man. You think you know what's going on, and then all of a sudden the chaos ensues. So, Connor,
it's about DAM time.
That's right. There you go. I like it. What a way to close. But guys, hey, thank you all for being here tonight on this Halloween night. You chose to skip trick-or-treating and came to watch us talk college football. We appreciate that. So, C. Glassman, my man Mitch, Matthew Hazelhorst, Scotty B, Doggy, college football guy Mark, Mr. Bloodline, Charles Lehigh, my man Luis. We appreciate you in that super chat. Eddie, Robert, and everybody else who has stopped by tonight. We appreciate you and all your support. Make sure to be back next Tuesday. Next set of rankings come out. We'll be here watching them live with you and ready to get going with another in-depth discussion. And next time, we'll make sure to open up the phone lines and answer more in the chat as well. So looking forward to that. But in the meantime, you guys have a great rest of your Halloween night. Stay safe out there. And we'll see you next time right here on the Gridiron Expert. Have a great night, everybody.